Welcome back to Mrs. Wilson's Science. We're kicking off a brand new series today, comparing what it's like teaching in the US versus teaching in England, based obviously just on my personal experiences. As you can tell, I'm an American, and I've taught in the US and in England. I've taught in England now for 5 years, and I taught just over 10 years in the US. So what's it like? What are the differences? Well, let's dig in and find out. Today we're talking all about timetables versus schedules. So let's dive in and look at timetables versus schedules. So being in the US, I was used to using the word schedule, class schedules, yearly schedules, all of that. Whereas in England, we talk about our daily timetable, or really our fortnightly timetable. We'll get into that in a couple of minutes. First, let's talk about what it's like throughout the year. So I taught in Georgia, and I also taught in Florida for a short period of time. And both of those places, the general schedule of the year, the flow of it was very simple. You started in August, usually quite early in August, and you then would have your Labor Day holiday in September. And after that, you probably wouldn't have much of a break except for maybe conferences. We would have half-day parent conferences in November, early November generally. And then from there, we would have Thanksgiving. And initially it was like a 3-day time off, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And eventually it went on to be a full week of Thanksgiving break. And then the next time we had any time off was a couple weeks usually, sometimes a little bit shorter at Christmas time in December into January. And then from there, we would have MLK Junior Day off in January. And then it tended to be this huge long slog until we got to spring break, with maybe a President's Day or something else thrown in, or parent conferences once again. And then we'd have spring break that first week in April, and then we get into testing season and state testing and all of that, which would be really crazy. And then we would break up on the Wednesday before Memorial Day. As teachers, we would come in 5 days before the start of the school year and have pre-planning, and then at the end of the year, we would have 3 days of post-planning. And then sometimes we would have a work day in January and October and a couple other times as well. So that was kind of the basic of our schedule. And I always thought there were some really long periods of time where we were in school and it was really difficult. And so I had this idea that I always liked the idea of year-round school, but obviously I'd never had a chance to actually experience it. And then I moved to England, and I guess the way that the English school system works is in a way very much like a year-round system. So what we do, we start in September, and we have what are called inset days. So instead of teacher planning days or pre-planning, post-planning, we call those inset days. And so we have 2 inset days before the start of the school year in September. And then we have the first day of school, which is usually around Labor Day. In fact, this year, the first day for students will be on Labor Day, which is always weird that now I'm working on Labor Day, but hey, that's the way it is. I also work on Thanksgiving and the 4th of July, and yeah, that's probably the hardest thing to get used to. Anyways, so we start in September, and then what we do is we go from September into October, and that last week in October, we have our first half-term break, and that's a week off. When we come back, so beginning of November until December, we have just, our second term, and then we have 2 weeks off at Christmas. And then we come back in January, and we generally, the teachers will have 1 inset day then, and we also would have an inset day in October before that first half-term break. So then in January, we come back, and we have that next term. And then in February, about the middle of February, usually the week where Valentine's Day falls, we will have another half-term break. And then we'll come back after that half-term break, and then we'll be in school for 5, 6, 7 weeks. It kind of depends on how the calendar works that year. And then we'll have 2 weeks off at Easter. 2 weeks off at Easter. Not just a little spring break, 2 weeks off at Easter. And then we're back again. And we go until the end of May. And so that week where Memorial Day falls in the US, we will have our May half term, which most of it's in June, but they still call it May half term. So May half term, and then we come back in June, and then we go until about the middle of July, the 3rd week of July, before we break up for the summer, and then the summer break is about 6 weeks. it's great. I actually really like having all these breaks. I like knowing when they're going to be. The terms tend to be 7 weeks, usually at the most. Sometimes they're as short as 5, so it is weird that they're not all the exact same length. Unlike in the US, where we had, 4 sets of 9 weeks, 2 semesters, each one with 18 weeks, so that's a little bit different. But otherwise, yeah, I like it. The only time it gets hard is in summer. So when I'm on my May half term and all my friends in the US are breaking up for summer, generally, that's a little bit tricky. And then now, right now, I've just gotten out for summer break. This is my second week of summer break, and it's July 28th right now. Yeah, July 28th. And it's just our second week of summer break. Whereas all my friends who still teach where I did in Georgia went back on Monday. So if I were, if I had moved back now, I would get like 1 week of summer break, which would be crazy. That being said, the first year I was here, I had like huge, long summer break, so I can't really complain. So that's kind of the first difference is how the school year works. Now, and I know it really depends on where you are in the US, and different places in the US have completely different schedules throughout the year. So maybe you work in a year-round district, and maybe yours is very similar to what I described for England. Maybe it's completely different. Maybe it's hybrid between, my two experiences. And obviously this is just my experiences and not everyone's experiences, right? So that's something to think about and compare. So the next thing is like the day-to-day scheduling. So I taught middle school for 8 years, 6th grade, earth science. Teaching middle school, the way that it was set up where we were, the students had their 4 core classes. So science, math, English, social studies. Obviously been in England too long saying maths now. Then they had their connections classes. And really the only question was, when is that connection class going to be? And that was like the big question of each year we would talk about is, when is 6th grade going to have connections versus 7th versus 8th? And then how long will our class periods be? Will it be 70 minutes or 45 minutes? And that was like our big discussions. Whereas once you got going into the school year, right? And the most common thing I had was just 4 lessons in a row, with a planning period at the end of the day. And that's how it went. So I would just teach earth science, period 1, period 2, period 3, period 4. Same thing, maybe at a slightly different level, teach my classes, but I just taught earth science 4 times throughout the day. And I basically taught the same thing 4 times in the day. And then I went and moved to high school. And in high school, I taught chemistry, I taught engineering, I taught astronomy. And there was very similar. We did move to block scheduling 1 year, and moved into that. So that was a little bit different, but it was a traditional block schedule initially where we saw each class for a 90-minute block every other day. And so the biggest difference was there were initially 7 class periods, and then it dropped down to 6 class periods when we went to block. So it was 3 each day. But that wasn't a huge difference there. So either it was knowing your schedule, every day it repeated the same, or every other day it repeated the same. In England, it's completely different. So in England, I have a fortnightly timetable, which means it repeats once a fortnight, once every 2 weeks. And my timetable looks like this. Now, obviously, I can't memorize that timetable, so I'm really, really dependent on my planner, my teacher planner, for knowing what's going on every day. And you'll also notice that as opposed to like when I taught 6th grade, I taught 6th graders all day, and I taught them the same lesson 4 times in a row. And when I taught high school, I taught chemistry, so maybe I taught chemistry 3 times, and then 3 or 4 times, and then I taught astronomy or engineering once in every day or every other day. Now I could be seeing year 7, and then year 12, and then year 10, and then year 9, and it just is crazy. The students have science. Depending on if they're in Key Stage 3, which is kind of like middle school, versus Key Stage 4, which is lower high school, versus Key Stage 5, which is upper high school. We see them on average 6 to 9 possibly hours a fortnight, unless they do something called triple science, and they have more. They have 14 hours a fortnight. And so my particular students, I usually share them with one other teacher. In fact, for me, I've always shared them with one other teacher. So they have 2 different science teachers. They're learning 2 different things from 2 different teachers throughout the course of of the year, and I only see my students 3 or 4 times a fortnight. And that might mean I see them 4 times one week and 0 times the other week. I might see them like 2 and 2, or 3 and 1, or 2 and 1, depending on how many times I see them. And I find that, one, really weird, and challenging. In the US, it was really easy to pick up day to day to day, since we're doing the same thing. Whereas in England, you really have to think about planning ways, especially to help students retrieve what they've done previously in lessons. So I think retrieval practice is really, really important in England. And as much as I'm not a huge proponent of homework, I think homework is probably more important, just to make sure that they're not forgetting from one class to the next what they're doing. That can make it really challenging. Sometimes I might not see a class for a week, so I'll see them maybe on Wednesday, and I don't see them again until the next Wednesday. And so a week between a class to me is very strange, and maybe not the best way. You might wonder, well, why is this? And that's because students take GCSEs from Key Stage 4, which generally starts in year 9 or year 10, depending on the school. Year 9 is like 8th grade. Year 10 is like 9th grade. So basically, anytime I say a year for England, just assume it's like subtract 1, and that's what the grade is like in the US if you want to compare it. They start these GCSEs in year 9 or year 10, and they take 9 or 10 different GCSE subjects, and they get examined on these. So this is basically 3-year courses, and they get examined on them at the end, and how well they do on that is going to then set them up for their next stage, their Key Stage 5 education, which could be in college, which is different from the US. So here it's more like technical school. So, if you have like a technical program or technical high school, that's what college is, similar to here in England. Or they would go on possibly and do something like A-levels, and A-levels is a lot like AP classes, but instead of being a 1-year course, they're 2-year courses with an exam at the end, and that is what determines whether or not students get into university, or what university they get into, what program they get accepted to based on how they do on those. And then the third option is for them to do an apprenticeship, which I think that's really cool. I think being able to just leave school at 16 and go and start working on an apprenticeship and getting trained to do a career is a great option for a lot of students. But they are in compulsory education until 18, so they have to stay in some form of education until 18. It doesn't have to be traditional schooling, right? It doesn't have to be like sitting in a classroom behind a desk doing the same thing that they've done since reception, which is similar to what they call kindergarten. But I think it's actually preschool. I haven't quite worked that one out yet. So anyways, yeah, so that's a little bit about what schedules and timetables are like. Like I said, the hardest thing for me is not seeing the same classes every day or every other day, having that fortnightly rotation of my timetable. Oh, and then the other thing, let's talk planning periods, because obviously if you're a teacher, that's hugely important to you. So in the US, basically, I had one planning period every day. And that's what teachers got. Even when we did block schedule, which I think is unusual, because I think sometimes it might be one planning period every other day, depending on the school. But here, if you saw my timetable, it might be, I might have 2 planning periods in a day, and another day I might have 0. And so it makes you be really organized and planning ahead, probably more so than I did in the US. You definitely have to think ahead for things, plan what you're going to do. And those 5 lesson days can be really long. That's difficult, but yeah, that's a huge difference. And then the final thing that's really different is that we have a break time every day, and that's probably one of my favorite things about the English school timetable, is that we have a break, 15-minute break. Everyone has a break, 15-minute break every day. Kids can go outside and play. They can go and get something to eat. It's great for teachers, gives you that, you've got that 15 minutes where you can get a cup of coffee, or, we're in England, so a cup of tea. You can use the toilet, go to the bathroom, which is great, even though you can count on that time to do that. I love that we have that. And then we also have lunch. Obviously, we would have lunch during the day, too. So I was always a proponent. I was really pushing for my old school to say, like, we need recess. And I was teaching high school at the time. I was like, our kids need recess. And then I come to England, and guess what? They have recess. They don't call it recess, but yeah, it's kind of cool that they get to do that, to have that little break time. And I think it's a nice way. So we generally will do, so our kind of daily schedule, we have form in the morning, and form is like homeroom. And then after that, we have period 1, and then we have period 2. And it used to be after period 2, we would have break. It was different this year because of all the COVID stuff. And I think next year it's going to be a little bit different, where some year groups will have it before period 2 and some after period 2. Then we have period 3. After period 3, we go to period 4. Period 4 is where we have the lunches, and normally we have 3 different lunch times. So your class will either have lunch before the lesson, in the middle of the lesson, or at the end of the lesson. And what time you have lunch each day is going to change depending on what year group you're teaching at that particular time, which is fascinating. Then we go to period 5, and we finish at 3:15. So we start at 8:35, 8:30, 8:35 is when 8:40. It's been a mess this year. So 8:40 generally is when students start form. And then they go to their first lesson around 9. Each lesson is about 55 minutes. They sometimes are 50 to 60 minutes, so it just depends. And then we get done at 3:15. At 3:15, we have extracurricular things. We might have teacher meetings after school. Sometimes there's period 6 lessons, and that's generally for 6th form, the A-level classes that we have if they can't fit on the timetable anywhere else. So I have had to teach a period 6, but only once a fortnight, so it's not a big deal. And so that's really nice, because when I taught high school, we were starting at like 7:20 in the morning. Kids were getting to school at 6:45. And they did feed them breakfast. That was nice. But they were getting, we'd have our first lesson at 7:05, 7:20. It'd be really early. I don't even remember now. It's been 5 years. And we'd get out at 2:15. But that was really early and difficult, I think, for high school students. So I do like the timing that we have of our school day now, in that 5 lessons, and it's only 5 lessons a day. It's really not that bad. We have break time, and I get break time every day except for 1 day a week. We'll have break duty, which is not a big deal. It's just for that 15 minutes, just kind of watching what's going on with the students, and you have an assigned spot, which is not a big deal. We never have lunch duty. When I taught middle school, we had to eat lunch with our students. Don't have to do that, which is nice. We get to eat lunch by ourselves with other teachers, which is great. So yeah, that's kind of the differences between timetables and schedules and teaching in the US versus teaching in England. So yeah, I hope you found that interesting, and next time we'll be looking at something else. I've got some different things for us to talk about. So I was thinking about, how classrooms look different, how grades and marking is different. That's exam culture. Huge difference here compared to the US. If you thought it was bad in the US, just wait. Leadership, how that works is really different too. So anyways, in this series we'll be looking at all those different things, seeing what it's like to teaching in England versus teaching in the US, at least based on my personal experiences. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll catch you next time. See you later from Mrs. Wilson Science.